Welcome into this special episode of Tapping Vegas. Me and Bobby are breaking down how to fix a UFC today. Big thing in the news lately is the ESPN deal is over. They're looking to maybe move to Netflix, stay with ESPN. UFC doesn't really know which direction they're going to go. And just to say that, the calls are bad or that maybe it's a bad card. There's a lot wrong with the UFC, and we're going to dive into it today. That there's a million things you can pick apart, but what is wrong and what can we do to make it better? So me and Bobby have some ideas. We hope you guys leave us some comments. Let us know if you like the ideas. Maybe you have an idea that we missed. We'd love to hear it in the comment section. We'll hit you back with a response. Bobby, why don't you start us off, man? There's a billion things that we could probably say, but what's the first pressing issue on your mind?
I think you kind of alluded to it in the intro. The first thing that's coming up is what happens now that the ESPN deal is over. And the ESPN deal, when that started in 2019, I believe it was, that Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw card was the first card of the ESPN era. Everybody thought that that was going to propel the sport to new heights, right? Make it accessible, make it even more user and viewer friendly. And I don't really think that's the case. Obviously this is anecdotal. I could probably pull up some numbers, but I don't think that the ESPN deal has brought the UFC to any greater of an audience. I think the people who are always going to watch the UFC have continued watching the UFC. And honestly, if they do, regardless of whether they stay with ESPN, whether they go to Netflix, whether they go to Hulu, whatever streaming service they move on to next, it's still going to be the same result, because I think their biggest problem with their current business model is how are you justifying charging a monthly or yearly subscription price for the streaming service itself, and that continuously goes up every year. It certainly doesn't go down in price. So you increase the price of the streaming service every year, that gets more expensive, and you don't get pay-per-views. So any pay-per-views you want to see, you still pay almost $100 for the pay-per-view on top of whatever you pay, for your monthly or yearly streaming service package, depending on how you structure it. And I think if you took away the pay-per-views and you included absolutely everything with the subscription, if you get the account, you have the subscription, then you get unprecedented all access to everything. Because here's another problem with the current model. To watch every single UFC fight, and granted, maybe I'm wrong, point it out in the comments if I am. I haven't tried watching a fight before 2019, before the ESPN deal. I haven't tried searching for one on ESPN in a long time. But to watch every single UFC fight that existed before that 2019 ESPN deal, you can't do that with ESPN. You have to have Fight Pass. So you have to have two different streaming services if you want to watch every single UFC fight that you can't just find for free on YouTube or find for free on some other website. And you have to pay for the pay-per-view for any and all pay-per-views. So you're getting charged 3 times for 3 different things to watch one sport, and it's getting ridiculous. And that's why we have a problem with piracy. That's why we have a problem with people not wanting to pay for pay-per-views. And the only way you fix that issue is if you just make everything on one streamlined service. Every fight from the inception of the organization is on one streaming service. You pay that fee for the streaming service, and you also get pay-per-views. So they really need to fix that, because it's just absolutely ridiculous. And, detractors will say, well, that's how the NFL is. Well, guess what? The NFL, I would venture to say, has a hell of a lot more fans and a hell of a lot more money coming into it than the UFC. And if the UFC keeps up with this, the whole too big to fail thing is not going to work out in its favor, because MMA and the UFC is far more niche than the NFL, than the NBA, hell, even – well, it's probably more popular than MLB, but I mean, come on now. And especially for anybody who's outside of America, the Europeans and everything, I can't even imagine the nonsense that people outside of the country have to deal with to watch fights. Or hell, maybe it's simpler. But point blank period, no matter who they go to next, they need to make everything accessible on one streaming service. completely cut out the pay-per-view. There's no separate price for the pay-per-view. It's included in your monthly subscription cost, and just make it more streamlined and more affordable, because that's how you get more people to watch.
I'm so glad that you took that part, because you hit on a lot of things that I didn't think about. One of the things that I had that you did touch on was like the illegal streaming. It's like people do that because you can't charge $80 a card. You just can't do that.
No.
And then you were talking about it still being such a niche sport. It's because, all right, Bobby, you and me both have ESPN Plus. We watch the cards, we watch the fights. What are the biggest fights of the year? It's not those. It's not
Right.
the ESPN Plus ones. They're always pay-per-view cards. And so how do you grow a sport when every single really good fight with these guys that you want to promote and make big names, and like, unless you're shelling out $80, which who is going to do that doesn't know the sport and isn't into the sport?
Right.
Like, I'm into the sport, you're into the sport, and we don't shell out $80 for every single card. And so
Yeah,
how
it's
do
too
you grow a
much.
sport? It's ridiculous. They're hamstringing themselves. And the number one money makers, so guys are going to bring in the fans, are behind a second paywall. And it's just, fans just can't do it. They're prospective fans.
Yeah, 3 paywalls. Paywalls for old fights on Fight Pass, paywall to get ESPN Fight Night cards, and then a paywall for pay-per-view. And that's a perfect point, because, yeah, there's 12 pay-per-views a year and $80 trying to buy every pay-per-view on top of what you spend for your ESPN Plus subscription, on top of what you might spend on Fight Pass, is just absolutely insane. And you have to wade through the increasingly terrible content of those Fight Night cards with absolutely garbage cards, with just meat grinder, cheap contract contender series fighters who might be gone after you get, invested in them in like a month and get cut. And it's just a never ending cycle of just like, okay, I'm invested and now I can't be because they're cut. And it's just hard to pay attention and to get motivated when, like you said, all the Fight Night cards are increasingly getting stacked with garbage and the pay-per-views are top to bottom of the talent.
Right. I'm glad you agree with me. One of the things that is kind of a blanket complaint and a blanket solution is fighter pay. They say the fighters aren't paid enough, and then the solution is pay them more. Okay, well, that's incredibly lazy on both sides, I feel. So I've broken it down in a couple steps. The first one I'm going to hit on is something we talked about before the show, but you need to provide a bigger incentive to get the finish. We've got just too many cards, especially these like Apex cards, where it's just boring decision after boring decision after boring decision. And sometimes, they'll get a guy, but they don't attack because they don't want to burn out their gas tank. Maybe these guys will go for the finish. Maybe they'll try an extra move or throw an extra punch if there's actually an incentive, not just getting the win. Maybe if they can get, I say every finish gets, every single finish, not just the finish of the night, not just the fight of the night, every single finish, the winner gets, I'd say 2 times the cash, or at least more cash than what they're getting right now. And that's for every single finish. I just think that should be across the board. And that way these guys are going out there fighting. They're not going out there hugging, which we'll get to later. These guys are actually going out there to put a guy down. And once again, this isn't like, I'm not Mr. CTE just championing for dudes getting knocked out. This is submissions, this is TKOs, this is anything. Just actually going out there like football. They're trying to make it safer. It's a physical sport. It's an aggressive sport. It's guys hitting each other. This is fighting, guys. They should be out there fighting, not just out there dilly-dallying until 15 minutes is up and then heading out. You guys want to be paid more? Fight like it. What do you think, Bobby?
Yeah, I agree. The only thing I would add to the conversation is, we're bringing up complaints. We're offering solutions too. You get the best of both worlds on this show. We complain, but then we also give you issues. We complain, but then we also give you solutions. Issue and solutions. So it's really nice. My only thing is, I would say two times. The only problem with two times their show money is a lot of these people are a lot of these men and women are already on terrible contracts, like 15,000 to show, 15,000 to win. So double for them would only be 30,000. And I know it's really hard for $1 billion company to do this, but hear me out. Hear me out. All right. How about if we keep? So we have two options. Number one, all right, we're going to be cheap asses and we're just going to keep that $50,000 that's been for years and years and years for performance of the night and fight of the night. But like you said, we'll give it to everybody on the card who gets the finish regardless. If we really want to be cheap asses, we'll just keep it at 50. Or hear me out, we're $1 billion organization that, is the leader in combat sports, premier combat sports in the entire world, not just America, the entire world. How about we bump that up to 75,000? Bare minimum. Let's say you really just can't justify it because we're cheap asses, even though we're worth $1 billion, right? How about you at least, if you're only going to do performance of the night, fight of the night, sub of the night, whatever, at least bump that up to like 75,000 if you're still only going to give 3 of them out or however fucking many it is. It's been like 50,000 forever, except for those few cards where he was like, hey, they asked. So since they asked tonight, I'll raise it up to something like just make it just going forward, inflation, blah, 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 blah. Just make it 75,000 if you don't want to offer it for everybody.
I'm still. This is my way to fix the decisions. I'm sticking with it. Everybody, Dana, or nobody. Bobby, what's your next point, man?
My next point in terms of talent development, right? So it used to be the Contender Series, and the Contender Series was how you had good fighters, and there were a lot of positives with that, right? Excuse me, not the Contender Series. Ultimate Fighter came first. It used to be the Ultimate Fighter. There were a lot of good things about the Ultimate Fighter. The main thing was it was a season long, right? So even though it kind of puts you as the fighter at a disadvantage because you're having to cut weight a lot faster and more frequently than you would ordinarily due to the like tournament style nature of the show, at least that gave you some time to like get development, right? Because usually the way those shows were set up were you were being coached by somebody close to your weight class, right? Like, Chael Sonnen was coaching the middleweights, and Vanderlei Silva was coaching the middleweights and everything. And so they brought in their top-notch coaches and their nutritionists and all these other minds for you to kind of learn from while you're on the show. So worst case scenario, even if you were a guy or girl who got, knocked out or kicked out of the house or whatever in the first round, your first fight, at least you got to have that experience of being around high-level elite UFC talent, picking their brains, being able to learn from the coaches they brought in, get some experience, things of that nature, and be able to help progress your career. And maybe you could come back and win the next season or whatever, So it was nice that it allowed you that level of talent development. Now, somewhere around the way, somehow, some way, it ended up that stopped being the best way to get talent. I can't really say why. Maybe it started with when they started doing seasons where the coaches didn't fight at the end. Maybe that started having an effect on, all right, what's really the incentive now? If like the coaches aren't motivated, we're not motivated. Maybe that was it. I don't know. But we moved to the Contender Series. And now the Contender Series is the, main source of talent coming into the UFC. I think it also has to do with the fact that the Ultimate Fighter, the ratings started to go down, the novelty of having because, you got to keep in mind, the Ultimate Fighter came about when reality TV was a huge, huge thing in the early to mid 2000s, right? You couldn't throw a stone without hitting a reality TV show about something. And so one about fighting was very popular at the time because there were no other real fighting reality shows. So maybe once the ratings started going down, they were like, all right, well, let's pivot to Contender Series. Contender Series on paper sounds great, right? Because some things we're going to be talking about later, some issues we're having with stalling and with, not going for the finish, not having that finishing instinct, just being content to just kind of point fight, just kind of wet blanket and all that. You kind of thought, oh, well, these guys and girls on Contender Series that are getting contracts, the show was set up that you really have to make an impression. You really have to get a finish to have a high chance of actually getting signed at the end of each episode, right? Because the whole thing was there's only 3 contracts and like 6 fights or something, right? So you got to go out there and you got to make an impression. And if you go to decision, it better have been a damn good decision. It's why guys like Torres Finney, right, with that stinker of a decision, it took them 3 times to get to actually make it into the UFC. So you would think that would lead to more finishes. Not necessarily. It's something we've talked about on this show all the time. Regional scene, even like other pro organizations like Cage Warriors, Combate America, whatever, just because you get finishes on those circuits doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to get the same finishing ability in the UFC with savvier fighters, smarter fighters. They may not be the best in terms of skill and physicality and athleticism, but at least the mental aspects there with some of these grizzled vets, and it just doesn't translate. And it hasn't really, once again, anecdotally, without the evidence in front of me in my little spreadsheet and pushing my glasses up and pushing the pen across the paper, it doesn't seem like it's made a difference with these people coming in. It's been nice because you get at least 3 new fighters every show, but the downside is it really starts to get saturated. And those contracts that those guys and girls are getting are cheap, and I call it all the time, cheap meat grinder contracts where you're getting a very low level of show pay, very low level of win pay, and you're getting a finish, and that's all exciting and fine. But what happens when you make it to the UFC and you can't get the finish and you kind of get exposed as just one dimensional? Then you get cut, and it's hard to just get invested in fighters that you don't know how long they're going to be around. For every Sean O'Malley that had success, right? Anthony Hernandez had success. Brendan Allen had success. A lot of people have had success off Contender Series. Jamal Hill, right? For all those, there's like a Vanessa Demopoulos and countless others who, just didn't make it and just flamed out. So there has to be some new way of acquiring talent other than just saturating every fall. You get like 24 or something ridiculous new fighters every fall. And maybe out of those 24, you might get 3 that actually are still with the organization in a year or two. And out of those 3, maybe only 1 or 2 actually go on to make noise and actually get ranked in their division, and et cetera. I don't know if, refocusing on tough and actually investing in tough is the answer. Because obviously if it's not making money, then they're not going to want to do that, which is just a shame because once again, we're a $1 billion organization, but we're cherry picking and getting upset over ratings. But I don't know, maybe they do something to make tough more exciting without being gimmicky. And they actually, like, they're going to have Chael Sonnen and DC coach on this upcoming season. That's great. Maybe that I get eyes on it just because it should be a fun season. I haven't watched in a while. I might watch it, but it still takes away when you don't have the 2 coaches at the end fighting each other, right? Like, it has to take a really special season like the Conor Uriah Faber season where they're not fighting each other. It has to be something special like that for you to really get invested in if they're not going to fight each other.
Ah, there's a snake in the grass.
Yeah.
I've got nothing to add, Bobby. I think that was perfect. I wouldn't change anything about it. So I'm going to move on to my next point here, which I think will be, if there's people that are commenting, man, you guys are idiots, I think it'll be on this one because I think this is probably a pretty hot topic, and I'm very interested to see your thoughts on it. Putting a timer on wall hugging. So my thought process here is like Torres Finney, like you had what, some dude's balls on the back of your neck for 15 minutes, and then they said you were the winner because you just controlled a guy against the cage. Bilal, remember the wall, Mr. Stahl, Muhammad, just the same thing. Just one of those guys that is just going to put you up against the cage. I mean, even Ian Gary, to an extent, seems like he's one of those guys that will put you in a clinch and put you up against the cage. In 1954, the NBA saw that they had a problem. What was going on is teams that were very good at controlling the ball were able to just go down and just eat up large portions of the game, which sucked for the fans, which sucked for the game. So they installed the shot clock. All right, changed the game forever. And I think everybody would argue that changed in a good way. You say, okay, but like you can't change sports. In 2023, the MLB added the pitch clock. So pitchers can't just stand up there dicking around the entire time. You have to get rid of the ball. These games are going too long. We need to speed it up. I think the UFC's right there. I think you give them a 15 or 20-second clock, and if they don't get a takedown, or I'd say like working for the takedown, like if you have the guy's leg and you're pulling him off the cage trying to get a takedown, like that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they're just holding the guy up against the cage. Maybe he's around the legs, but he's not working for the takedown, and he hasn't had any, I'm going to say, reasonable damage, which once again, the UFC loves using very ambiguous words, right? You know, damage. It's based on damage. Okay, how do you rate damage? I'm going to say reasonable damage has occurred. If he's not throwing elbows, throwing knees, if he's just sitting there controlling this guy against the fence, 15 to 20 seconds, if nothing's happened, restart. Break them, restart the fight. Kind of like boxing. When they start clinching to each other, you break them up, restart in the center. I think that's what they should do to break down, to stop some of this. And once again, a lot of these Dagestani guys, right? A lot of this wall hugging. And I love wrestling. Wrestling is my background. But I just think it's gotten to a point where it's hurting the sport. What do you think about that, Bobby? Because I think that's pretty controversial.
I mean, I think you kind of alluded to it. MMA and especially the UFC, because we already covered this in our judging video, is very slow to change, right? And
Yes.
The perfect thing when you were talking about sports changing and sports evolving, everybody's like, oh, it's too difficult. You can't do it. I mentioned this in the judging video. I'm going to mention it again. The NFL's changed the rules over 50 times since 2002, right?
Right.
Now, the unified rules of MMA, which aren't really unified, and I'm not going to beat a dead horse because, once again, if you're interested in that, we've already done a video about judging on this channel. Check it out. MMA has changed the unified rules far less than that, roughly in the same amount of time. So you would think, wow, a sport that's changed the rules over 50 times since 2002 must be really hard to follow and very complex and convoluted compared to a simplified sport that hasn't had to make that many changes in the same time period. Wrong. MMA makes no fucking sense. Not even a people who've been watching forever, because, yeah, there needs to be something to fix the issue of, okay, this guy has, a ball sack on the back of his neck for 15 minutes and he wins the fight. But not even 15 minutes later on the same card, the next fight, it's like, okay, that guy loses. So I'll give you Gunnar Nelson versus Kevin Holland as a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
You and I very fucking happy that Kevin Holland won that fight as the underdog and as, picking him on the show, right?
Yeah, we did.
But here's the problem. It makes no sense because it's so inconsistent. He spent a lot of time on the bottom, but he outstruck from the bottom Gunnar Nelson 80-5. So if you want to change things, that's actually a great example of how you can be on bottom and still win the fight, because how in the hell are you in top position and throw 5 strikes and the guy on bottom hits you 80 times?
Right.
But if it had been 3 different judges, or maybe one of them had the flu, or maybe the other one had a Cherokee hair tampon shoved up there, and it was the eternal equinox of the spotless mind, and they had like our schizo episode, those same 3 judges 15 minutes later would have said Holland lost that fight. So there's got to be something, and I think some type of clock similar to what you're saying, the shot clock, something like that, I think there has to be. And we'll touch on it later when we go deeper into the rules and everything. But judging can't be fixed until the rules are fixed. Right. I have sympathy for the judges, because people, especially who are judges and in the judging community, act like I have no sympathy and I'm just such an asshole. I have sympathy for the judges after looking extensively into the rules. And I'm now convinced that the only reason why judging is screwed up is because you can't score without the rules. The rules dictate scoring, and the rules need to be changed before anything else can be changed. That's the real root of the problem and not just the stem. So, yeah, there's got to be something. I think a clock would be good. And it's like, yeah, you have to be active. You cannot just go out there and do a Torres Finney performance, or even like you said, even Ian Gary gets away with it because he does it a little bit more zesty. So I
Yeah, he
guess he
does.
probably distracts the ref. Ref gets a little distracted and everything, but something has to be done for sure.
I'm surprised you agreed with me. I'm very happy to hear that, man. How about point five already? What's another thing they can do to fix it, man?
Another thing they can do to fix it is, I think it goes back to, clarifying the rules. Like, how do you actually score damage? How do you actually score, takedowns, things of that nature? You can't just have vague language like you have in the unified rules right now. You have to have, in an objective sport, you can't have subjective language. And once again, we talked about this in the rules and refereeing video. If the NFL changed the points value of a touchdown, not only from game to game, but from, quarter to quarter, everybody would be outraged. They would be up in arms if the points value was changed just with every touchdown. You have all these games going on across the fucking country every Sunday. And, maybe in the Chargers Broncos game, they get a touchdown that's 3 points, but in the Jets game, that's going to be like 18 points or something.
Right.
But you have something similar in MMA with like a takedown in fight A is like all that matters, but in fight B, it matters not at all. Back to the Gunnar Nelson example.
It depends what part of the
Actually,
world you're from. The Dagestani
yeah,
takedown's worth more, right?
yeah. Add an actual points value. Add like 2 points for a takedown. I think it's already good that you have, like, I think for it to be considered a takedown, you actually have to be down for like 5 to 10 seconds, I believe. But I even wonder if they count that, because like when you see like a Marab, or like, when Habib gets a takedown and they literally set records, it's like I haven't exactly sat there with, with a stopwatch to see how long it's been. But you got to think that when they do like 20 takedowns, complete 20 takedowns in a fight, you got to think they're even having some leeway with that 5 to 10 second butt on the canvas rule. Actually make it concise, because that's what's going to help judges make decisions when you don't just leave it up to interpretation. Because of course there's going to be interpretation when you have 3 different people that you sit at 3 goddamn different vantage points. Even that just adds more confusion. You need uniformity. You need everybody right next to each other at the same damn table. They have the same physical view. They have the same stupid little monitor in front of them if they prefer the monitor view. And they all know that a takedown is 2 points, and a takedown has to have contact with the mat for 10 seconds. And, a jab, every time a successful jab lands, it's this. Every time, there's a knockdown's like this many points. Make it actually objective, and not just the fighter who demonstrates the most poise and aggression in conducting a vicious counterattack shall be given the utmost oomphy to his oomph. And it's like, get the hell out of here. Just make it numbers based. And I know people are going to be upset because originally it was just numbers based. And the argument against that was it just turns it into point fighting. Well, you got to pick your poison. Nothing is a foolproof 100% solution. But what would you rather have? If you legitimately would rather have way more contentious decisions and controversial cards and everything, then cool, just leave it how it is now. I get it. Whatever. It makes it too much of a point fighting thing, right? It takes it out of it. But guess what? What do we have now? What do we have now without points value? It's already going on, right? Because that was the
Right.
argument before 2018. Because originally in 2018 it was all about, just playing the significant strike game, right? Just pitter patter, just point fighting, all that. That was a criticism. So they're like, oh, it does need to be more subjective. And it's like, I feel like it hasn't made it any better. It's still the same level of confusion. It's still the same level of controversy, right? So pick
Right.
your poison, So
You mean that the one judge that made it 3-0 Valentine and the other guys went 2-1 Finney? Are you saying that they were wrong, Bobby?
yeah, because it's so because that's the problem, right? Everybody
Boom.
was crapping on the guy who was Valentine. What it's his opinion. It's
Yeah.
subjective. He felt that he was a more aggressive guy. Yeah, it's a
3-0.
stupid scorecard, but that's what happens when you have vastly different interpretations of the rules, right? And that's what happens. What if they had three guys like that for the Kevin Holland fight? And that's why Kevin
Right.
Holland beat Gunnar Nelson. Like, you never know the mix of the judges you're going to have. So, like I said, you either have a sport where you're wringing your hands complaining about how it takes away from the art and beauty of the sport by making it so rigid and scientific, or you wring your hands and you complain because you got, the boxing guy who actually is a very prominent referee, by the way. And I feel bad because I already forgot his name and everything, but the dude actually is a legend of boxing and everything. And it's like, but you're wringing your hands over him thinking the guy doing more striking is having the advantage. Well, guess what? That's his interpretation of the rules. Maybe if it had more clear, objective numbers assigned to it, he could see it a different way, and we could legitimately look into getting him fired or something if it's that egregious. But until then, I got no problem with it because that's just them's the rules.
Right. Right. No cheating. No cheating. It's just that's how it is. One of the things that we like making fun of on the show, and this one's gonna be a pretty quick one because I think we can all agree on this, is we say, you get the first eye poke, and it's like, watch your fingers. And then you get the second eye poke, and it's like, hey, I'm gonna raise my voice if you do it a third time. You poke him for the third time. Don't do it again. I'm gonna take a point if you poke him for a fourth time. Don't do it. Like, it's out of hand. It just needs to be either one or none. Like I say, I kind of think, accidents can happen. Some people say, you know, you're purposely poking eyes. That's what some people say. I've seen it out there that all eye pokes are on purpose. I don't know. I'm not a UFC fighter. I feel like your finger could slip out sometimes. So I'll say one, and everyone after that, they're taking a point. Because it's just ridiculous. You can't keep nut shotting these guys, poking them in the eye. And like, this isn't just one of each. This is one of either. So if you hit them in the nuts and then poke them in the eye, that's still a point. You don't get one eye shot and one nut shot per fight. I think you need to take it away. And once again, the second one's accidental too. It doesn't matter. You need to be, if you do have that one, you need to be on high alert. What do you think, Bobby? One or none?
I agree. I agree. I have nothing to add because, yeah, until you do a hard one and done, you're going to continue to have fights where you get three nut shots, two eye pokes, one finger rake. Like, it's just going to continue to happen.
Yep.
You're not going to incentivize people to make a change because everybody always says the saying is, they even say it on commentary, right? Like, especially Michael Bisping. Oh, you get one free one. You get one free one. No,
Right.
you don't. You get 4,
Right.
5, 6 free ones. It depends on what mood they're in.
Right.
Depends on what mood they're in and what ref it is, right?
Right.
No, legitimately, one eye poke, one nut shot, one whatever it is, one of those, next one you get a point. It's the only
Yep.
way it's going to stop it. People, that's the only way. That's the only way you're going to learn. That's the only way you're going to learn to be in control of your weapons. I think it's like Mike Beltran, the ref. It's like control your weapons or whatever. When like
Yeah.
somebody's got their fingers extended instead of their fingers pointing towards the ceiling and everything.
Yeah.
Control your goddamn weapons. Control your weapons.
I'm glad you agree, man. Yeah, I think everybody's on board with that one. I think you would also see it drop dramatically, which is, it's going to be like one of those things where you're just like, okay, maybe like this should have been done sooner. Kind of like one of those no duh type moments.
Yeah.
Bobby, what's another point you got for the UFC?
I think that another point would be, so we've covered a lot of good ground. I think another thing would be, just really trying to promote the fighters. I get that their whole thing is we're bigger than the fighters, and that makes sense from a company standpoint, right? Like, you don't want to be just Connor, you don't want to be just Ronda. Like, you want to have something that's going to outlive those fighters, and I understand that because the fighters retire, the fighters get cut, the fighters go to different organizations. But actually, make legitimate promo packages for up and coming fighters. Like, I know that we have like the embeddeds. I know that we have the pay-per-view, like the pay-per-view countdowns and everything with like the main fighters on the pay-per-view get the little UFC countdown show for them and everything where it goes, behind the scenes for their preparation and all that. Do something like that more frequently, or like just every now and then, right? Like Darren Till, they actually did it for fucking Darren Till. I remember watching like a special little standalone little UFC promo about Darren Till when he was on the ascent and everything. Just pick random up and coming fighters like that and just randomly drop like, I don't know, 30, 45 minute, no longer than like an hour promo about them, following them around,
Right.
kind of getting an insight into who they are, their training, their family life, whatever the hell they want to talk about. And I think if you did that, that'd go a long way to getting some fans. People always love following their favorite fighters, learning more about them inside and outside the octagon and everything. Start actually doing a fun little promo because, yeah, it's going to suck when they retire. But like I said, you had the biggest superstar on the face of the sport. Even people's moms and grandmas have heard of Conor McGregor, and you're
Right.
still around after he left. And that's pretty much as bad as it gets. So you have nothing to lose by actually doing fun little promos and fun little videos more consistently for more lesser known fighters, not just the ones, who are embedded, not just the ones who have the UFC countdown for the pay-per-views and all that. Like, start doing it more frequently.
I love it. I've got nothing to add. I think they definitely need to do more promotion type stuff. And this kind of goes into like hand in hand with that, but this is like mandatory activity. I just think you want to promote your biggest fighters. You want to promote your biggest draws. These guys need to be fighting. Like John Jones taking these just massive long layoffs, and some of these guys fighting once a year. My thing is, I think they should all be fighting 3 times a year. And not only will that help the main cards, we'll have more and better pay-per-views. Hopefully, I don't know what to call them right now if they get rid of the pay-per-views, but big cards. But I think it's also going to beef up those the prelims and the like fight night cards. We're going to have better fight nights because we're going to have all these guys coming in. I think we just did like our first Marvin Vettori fight. And how long have we been doing this, Bobby? Like it'll be like 2 years and not too long. And we've just did like our first Marvin Vettori fight. Like that's crazy. There's some of these really, really good guys out there. And then the biggest complaint about that's going to be, what about injuries? And so I completely understand that. I think you need to get a third-party doctor, and that's a big part too, because I don't want these guys associated with the UFC at all. Because if it's the UFC doctors, they're going to push for them to come back sooner rather than later. I say you get a third-party doctor, and what these doctors do, which a lot of insurances do, I'm probably going to get like reverse Mangione or whatever the dude's name is by the insurance companies. They're going to come after me after this. But some of these doctors will push people, and we've seen it in other sports, that they give the people the clear to go and they weren't ready to go. But the team said, hey, we need this guy to play. The doctor's pushing. So I think this needs to be a third-party doctor that follows him, and he can't, which is going to be tough, seeing who's actually still hurting and who's not still hurting. But they'll be working with PT, they'll be working with this doctor, and getting these guys healthy and getting them back out there. There's no, I'm injured, and then you just sit on the sideline for 1.5 years until you get another big-name fight, and then you come back. If you're employed by the UFC, you should be fighting. And you should be fighting semi-regularly. I said 3 times because I know that these guys need a little bit of a break after feeling like they got ran over by a bus. This gives them like 3 months of the year, basically, where they can like not do anything. And then they have nice long camps for 3 fights. That seems like more than fair in my opinion. That they get all that time off and you're fighting 3 times, which I know it's not, you're working 3 days a year. Those camps count too. But I think 3 fights in a year is fair. I mean, not Pantoja. The light heavyweight champion that just lost, Pereira. Pereira would have fought 10 times last year if he could. I mean, these guys, there's guys that either want it or they don't. We got too many guys that don't want it.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially the third-party doctor, I agree with that. That's a great way to just make everybody except the UFC happy. But once again, the UFC just has to accept it.
Right.
Once again, the roster has 857 fighters or something absolutely ridiculous. It's insane. It's bloated. It needs to be cut. And this prevents the Conor McGregors. This prevents the John Joneses from just holding up belts and divisions forever, right?
Yes.
Like it just makes things flow. And, it's like to kind of add to that, the only thing I would add is champs in their division have to defend the title in their division at least 2 times, bare minimum 2 times, in my opinion, before they move weight classes. If they don't defend it 2 times, they need to do like Taporia and they need to vacate. So that's the only thing I would add to that, to add to the whole activity is there's no, I won the belt at 145. I'm immediately going up to 155 my very next fight. No, you win the belt in your weight class, you defend at least twice in that weight class. If you don't, then you're stripped. And yeah, we got to stop the Conor McGregor, the John Jones, just holding up a division. You have the belt. You got to defend the belt against whoever the hell is coming up. And whether that's Tom Aspinall, Tony Ferguson at the time for Conor, like it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go on my next point because they're kind of hand in hand. Excuse me. They're kind of hand in hand. But I think if they're fighting 3 times a year, and so it's more sanctioned out that it's not just picking and choosing when you want to fight, I think the UFC should do yearly wages on top of the fight contracts. So, like right now, they're independent contractors, I believe is what they're called. And then you're absolutely right, Bobby. It is 857 fighters, so very good memory. I don't know where you saw that from, but I made sure I wrote that down. If they're paying these guys, of course, for your big names, the Aspinalls and stuff, you're going to do more than this. But this is my just blanket. You're giving these guys 40-hour-a-week contracts at minimum wage. Okay, that's all I'm asking. So $15,000 a year. It's not a lot. But it's extra money in these fighters' pockets, which is once again something that is a big complaint with these fighters. But they have this $15,000 on top of whatever they're going to make from their fights. And then they have their brand deals and all that. I did the math, Bobby. If you do $15,000 a year for all 857 fighters, granted some will be more because of the name power, that's $12,855,000. The UFC made $1.4 billion in 2024 alone. That would mean if they paid everybody on their roster, which this is saying these guys have to fight 3 times a year, and probably you can trim some fat off of this, but paying everybody this yearly wage, 0.9% of what they made. For everybody to have 40-hour week minimum wage, 0.9% of the funds they made.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a pretty great idea. And you have to standardize it to would you say that 12,000 a year?
15,000.
15,000 a year. You have to standardize it to that, because if you don't, there's what state's minimum wage? What if they're an international fighter? I like that 15 flat rate. Yeah. I like that. My only thing to add to that, kind of mixing in with everything we've talked about in the past 10 minutes and everything with contracts and activity, is there has to be a way to where we're not trapping fighters in contracts, right? Like Conor McGregor, let's be real. Conor McGregor's been retired forever. Right. He's been retired realistically since 2018. The only reason why he keeps having to tease a return is because I'm pretty sure he still has fights left on his contract, right? And so that's a big problem with MMA, right? Let's say, you're Jalen Hurts and you want to retire whenever the hell you want to retire, or you're Antonio Brown and you want to retire in the middle of the game. You can basically do that. Right. You can basically retire in the middle of the game. You can't take your shirt off and make a big scene about it, but you have a lot of leeway over dictating, all right, I'm done. And, you lose probably some money and
Oh yeah,
everything, but hey, the NFL has guaranteed money. The NBA has guaranteed money. You're trapped. You're trapped in the UFC. You cannot just walk away. You cannot fight for a different organization. You cannot do anything until you fight out your contract, even if you don't want to. So maybe like a guaranteed money with like an option to buy out the rest of your contract or something like that, something to prevent these fighters who don't want to fight anymore, but they signed a contract. The UFC is lording it over them. Oh, you signed this contract. You still have 3-4 fights left. Like, sorry, suck it up. You got to figure out when you're going to get those 3 to 4 fights because they're not competitive, right? Nobody wants
right.
to see, because usually these fighters who are thinking about retirement or thinking about going to a different promotion, whatever, are at the tail end of their careers. It's not fun to see them go out there because a lot of times they're legends, right? They're Tony Ferguson's, and they go out there and just get highlight reeled for some
Right.
up and comer, right?
Right.
It's like give them some guaranteed money and then give them an option to buy out or like have better fucking agents or something to safeguard against them being taken advantage of like that.
Yeah. And I thought I saw something like, was it the NBA or the NFL like 40 good lord, excuse me. Like 40 or 50% of the revenue goes to the players. And so this strategy of 0.9% is not even like in the ballpark stratosphere of what these other organizations are giving their people. And I'm not even saying they need to give them NFL money. Like, I know the UFC makes less money than these organizations, but the pay and this is kind of like the WNBA's thing, but the WNBA I don't think is bringing in $1.4 billion either. But it's just not comparable, right?
Right. I'm going to actually Google what the WNBA brings in because, yeah, let's find out because 200 million, not even equivalent. WNBA 200 million a year, not
No,
even equivalent.
no,
Not even on the same stratosphere.
nope, nope. Uh, Bobby, what's another point that you got, man?
I mean, I think we're kind of getting towards the tail end. We've hit a lot of our points and everything.
Yeah,
I think we're pretty much. I think we're there. I think these are the most pressing things, right? The you know the minimum wage, mandatory activity, ditching the pay per view, one and done on the cheap shots, right? Adding like
right.
some type of clock system to try to prevent all the wall hugging and all the stalling, greater incentives on the finishes. I mean, this is pretty much spot on, right? These are things that if you actually pursue them, do something different with your talent, right? Bring in either commit to the Ultimate Fighter, change up Contender Series, do something to bring in better talent, right? I mean, between looking for a fight, and I don't even know when the last time he did looking for a fight was, like last year, maybe 2 years ago. Looking for a fight, Ultimate Fighter, and Contender Series. You got to have something to kind of figure out, okay, these 857 fighters, who's actually worth keeping, who actually
Yeah,
has potential in this organization. Like, come on. And then, so you do that, you actually promote fighters, besides just countdowns and embeddeds, you actually use the media and all the socials and everything else you have behind you to actually promote exciting up and coming fighters. All those things would greatly benefit the UFC, make it a much better product.
I absolutely agree. I guess I got a couple more. They're just not. We've kind of touched on them a little bit, but the one that I would want to add is get out of the Apex. I mean,
Yeah.
it's dead in there. It's dead. These crowds want it. Like, come around to any of the stadiums more. The stadiums are awesome. Everybody loves it. You give all these different cities an opportunity. Like, I don't know if they've ever been to OKC. If they haven't, go to OKC. There's probably some fans there. It's just like come back to St. Louis. They're going to Kansas City. Okay, great. This should be like a common thing that you guys should be hitting all these places, not just the Apex. But LA and Dubai are like their big places. And I know Taporia is pushing for Spain. It's like, go do Spain. They do London, But once again, if you're going to do London on London time. Like, if you're going to these different countries, do not make these fans and stuff be there at 5 a.m. They have to watch it on our time all year long. Wherever you're at, conform to their time, but get out of the apex. Get out of the apex and be more, what's it called? In tune with the fan? Is that what I'm trying to think of? More, like hand in
more
hand
in
with your
touch.
fans. In touch, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's another great point, because for a company that's obsessed with making money, and it's like, well, how are we going to pay for a minimum wage, basically, for fighters? How are we going to pay for increasing the performance bonuses and whatnot?
Mhm.
By going to a place that you get a gate, by going to a place that actually has capacity other than like 30 people in bleachers. The
Right.
point of the Apex was for the Ultimate Fighter, right? It started off for the Ultimate Fighter, where it made sense that the main way you're watching it and enjoying it is for the reality TV aspect of it, right? And following along for the storylines and to see who makes it each week and everything. And I know it really got co-opted for COVID because it just made perfect sense, right? You have to have a smaller venue for social distancing. It already makes sense that the Apex was set up for small crowds to be able to spread people out. COVID's been over and done with, though.
It's lazy.
COVID's over and done with. Yeah, keep the Apex for the Ultimate Fighter, and that's it. Go back to actually going out on the road. That way you can keep making the money that you're obsessed with, and that way you have justification to do the things that we're talking about to improve your business, because you're handicapping yourself by not making money. You can't just charge a crazy gate for 30 people at the warehouse that you can for an Oklahoma City card, which I don't think they've been to since 2017, by the way. So it's been fucking ever.
Right.
So go to OKC, go to Seattle, go to New York, like just go to New Orleans, like expand.
New Orleans, yeah.
Make money.
It's why are we begging them to make money? Like, these are all these changes we've said today. They should already like be trying to implement this stuff from the talking heads that are in that room. So what is going on at the UFC that these thoughts aren't being pushed around?
Dude, make me a matchmaker. I could put together better damn fights than Mick Maynard and Hunter Campbell.
Yes, you could, man.
My face, your ass, 2025, Apex. What's up? Or what is it? Your ass, my face? Damn.
We've been talking about some nuts, now you're starting to talk about ass. This is gonna be a kind of a scandalous episode. Looking at the transcript for it. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for us here. Thank you guys for watching. Just about an hour, so the UFC should have time to digest it. You guys can tag the UFC, and once again, leave comments down in the comment section. Let us know kind of your guys' thoughts on some of the ideas that we brought up and some of the ideas that we might have missed. We'd love to hear them in the comments section. Bobby, thanks for joining me, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Like I said, it's always nice to be on the show. Unfortunately, I missed last week. Had some rumbling to do and knocking some people out and raising some hell. So we're gonna keep making content, and I'm gonna try to find something to be interested in. I've been contemplating doing a Teba Gautier article because I am still really impressed from his Mexico City first fight against Medina. So I might do a little article about him, kind of like prospect watch. So might actually pull the trigger on that this weekend. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, we got 2 weeks without the UFC, so now's the perfect time to do it. You guys can find that article and other articles. We do, like women's UFC, we've got a betting method that we've been following for probably coming up on a year. And then we have another like DFS article that we do every week. So breaking down the card, giving you guys the value of the week, the must play of the week, and the stay away of the week. Make sure you guys check that out. Bettergreen.com. That's better, BETTOR green.com. Getting a little bit of a facelift lately. A whole new fantasy section coming if you play fantasy football in the near future. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you later. Peace, guys.
Peace.